If you had no fear of the consequences, what story about yourself would you tell? It is a given in life, whether we like it or not, that we're going to go through several identity crises. Maybe you've been trying to accomplish some goals for several years, but you couldn't because life is getting harder and harder. Or maybe you're tuning into a new inner voice that is asking you, do I even want to accomplish these goals anymore? Was I even doing this for myself? And sometimes the reason behind these identity crises are life transitions. Like, for example, maybe you have just recently become a parent and you're losing all the connection with your eroticism in the logistics of diapers and baby bottles. Or maybe you have just finished a long-term relationship or job where you had your identity attached to. And maybe you are trying to figure out what's next in your life without that label or that profession. Sometimes we are also leaving behind a life stage like adolescence, and now we are not fully independent adults yet, but at the same time we need to figure out what are our passions and what are going to be our professional careers. All these situations ask for the most challenging question any human will confront in their life. Who am I and what makes me me? Hello, I'm Eva Emery, and this is Humans Academy, the place where we use the therapeutic power and benefits of the narrative arts. And in today's episode, as you can imagine, we are going to explore one of the most, if not the most, philosophical question, and also my favorite topic so far: self-discovery and self-knowledge. We are going to do that through storytelling and some journaling prompts that I want to bring you from some books and experts that have most influenced me in origin story, heritage, cultural capital, labels, and other dimensions that I find compelling to understand our uniqueness in the world. If you love self-discovery and you are going through a major transition in life, stay tuned because this episode is for you. By the end of it, you're going to find a superpower that you didn't know you had, hidden in your origin story. It's time to change the narrative and acknowledge our past. Let's dive in and let's find your superpower together. We humans are very complex creatures full of paradoxes and difficult experiences and challenging narratives that makes us see the world through a very subjective lens. So if we want to see ourselves in a more complex and complete frame, we need to dare to ask questions and experiment ourselves in different contexts. So if we want to do that, we need to explore what I call the 4 fundamental cardinal points of the human identity. This broader approach to self-observation is pretty much influenced by Chris Doe's self-discovery brand identity wheel, which I discovered in the Adobe Max 2023 event that you can also find here on YouTube. This is a frame that I also normally use for the discovery sessions to see if I onboard new mentees. I normally go through the main questions that you're going to see today from these 4 points. By the way, he has recently released a workbook called Unblunt Yourself. Is only in digital format, just in case that you want to have an eye. I'm going to link the book here in the description box. It's going to be released in mid-2026 in the printed format, which I'm really desperate to buy it. The 4 fundamental cardinal points of human identity are the West, which is going to be our origin story and our life story. So this is for me the timeline from the moment we were born onwards. Okay, but then if I think about the East, is broader perspective, is our timeline in a broader perspective. I could say that is even our cultural heritage and our cultural capital from even before we were born. And this takes our background, our community, and cultural heritage. Then we have the North. This is very important and fundamental because here is where we are going to explore about our essence as humans and also the way in which we love to self-express and our defining attributes. And last but not least, in fact, I would say is one of the most challenging but also interesting ones, is the South, the place where our enemies and our biggest fears live. And this is also the place where our biggest superpowers are hidden. So let's dive in. This is a compound of our origin stories, but also other stories from our past that has most impacted, for better or worse, our lives and who we are today. And we need to revisit these chapters of our lives because sometimes we carry with us narratives and limiting beliefs that are doing a huge disservice to our self-esteem, self-concept, and therefore also the goals we want to accomplish in life. And sometimes the reason we start to taking this seriously and remembering, making an acknowledgement of where are we coming from is precisely because we are going through a major transition, or maybe because we are also forced by life to acknowledge and be gentle with our own stories. To do that, there is no better expert than community architect and author Radha Agrawal. She's the creator of the most amazing sober practice I have ever seen in my life, and I would highly recommend you to go and watch on YouTube maybe as well. The Daybreaker communities, this community I'm telling you. And in her book Belong, which is also a must read if you don't have it or you haven't heard of this one, she invites us to take 2 hours on a random Sunday and to slow down a little bit from our frenetic lives and gently explore the major events that have shaped our lives. So for that, what you need to do is you only need to draw like a line on a piece of paper and then create a life timeline. So you're going to use colors and pens and watercolors. Free your imagination and just create a life timeline where you are going to portray the major events or major chapters of your life. She also provides her own life timeline so you can get inspired and see what things you can also explore from your life. But the idea is that you get to see what are the fundamental events that has shaped the person that you are today. One of the most interesting parts of doing this exercise is that it is a very visual exercise. So when you are exploring your life, you can also ask yourself, how many times did I move from city to city, and how long from one move to the next? Or why did you choose to move to those places? Was it because of a person or a job, or maybe you had other priorities? All these questions are going to reveal maybe a pattern for you. The other thing that she does is, after this exercise, she provides a lot of questions so you can go a level deeper, but those are going to be more related to your childhood. And maybe depending on your situation, you might want to do that with a psychotherapist. But if you think you can go that far with yourself gently and with a lot of support, then go ahead and do it. This is our cultural capital or our cultural background. And this is a combination of our family history, the languages we speak, the religions we have, the cultures that we have intertwined in our families, the books, the teachers, and everything that have ever impacted our personality, for better or worse, that are doing the way we think today. Basically, this is our values and our beliefs. This might be in politics, in the data and the media we consume, in the way that we create art, even in the way that we spend money, or the way in which we make love. All of that is our cultural heritage, and it's the biggest window we have to see how do we operate and interact with the outer world. And before we continue, let me explain to you something, because this dimension is going to overlap with the next one or even the previous one. So a caveat here from me would be that even though I am suggesting you this frame to explore yourself and to play with discovering yourself, we cannot compartmentalize our essence as humans. So don't worry if you see that sometimes you don't have very clear lines from the West and the East or the North and the South. What I would tell you though is that when the West is more like a chronological line of the events and the major chapters in our lives, the East is more like going zoom in some of those chapters. And then you get to decide where do you want to stop a little bit more and explore a little bit more depending on the chapter you are also in your life right now or the transition that you are going through. So for example, if you are right now going through parenthood, you want to maybe get a little bit more in depth in your own childhood and discover things that you grew up with. But if you are going through a professional transition, maybe you want to see the patterns in the jobs that you had throughout your life and why did you choose those jobs. In any case, the exercise I want to suggest you for this specific dimension is the one by Tayi Selassie. She has one of the most amazing TED Talks I've ever watched, and is called Don't Ask Me Where I Come From, Ask Me Where I'm a Local. And this is a talk that is going to make you see your identity not from a standpoint of your nationality or your passport, but more about the lived experiences that you had. And according to her, we have many experiences in which we have acquired our identity in cultural terms, probably what I have come to understand as our cultural capital or our cultural heritage. So she suggests you to do an exercise for self-discovery called the 3 R's: rituals, relationships, and restrictions. And for that, I'm going to need you to take a piece of paper and divide it into 3 columns. So the first R is rituals. And this, she says, is for you to think about the way you make coffee. How do you go to work? What are the prayers you have? So ask yourself, how did they occur? How did you come to have those rituals or those habits in your everyday life? In what cities did you develop them? And where in the world do shopkeepers know your face? This is super interesting. And when I did this for the first time, I was so blown away by how many rituals I have that come from different countries and different cities in Europe. And that made me realize how much I'm a multicultural person. We tend to think of us as monodimensional, but that is so far away from the truth. We are influenced by the food, by the music, by the books and the teachers and the mentors that we have. So I hope that with this exercise, you get to see a more complex human behind you. Okay, the second R is relationships. And she says, think about the people in your everyday life. To whom do you speak regularly? And is it face-to-face, or is it FaceTime, or is it by written message? This must be not the people that you have on Facebook or on TikTok, but the people who shape your weekly emotional experience. So these are the people that you want to list on this column of the exercise. The last R is the least sexy, as she says, is restrictions. And this is what cities and countries are you able to live in? What passport do you hold? Because according to her, knowing not only where you have lived, but also where you couldn't live is going to also reveal a dimension of your identity that you might not know. Are you restricted in some settings by racism and maybe you cannot feel fully at home because of that? Did you move as a refugee to the country where you live in right now? Maybe as a consequence of low opportunities in your area and you had to move to another city because there is no job in the area where you live. Maybe because of economic inflation and you cannot allow yourself to pay for a rent and that's why you had to move to a new city? Or is it because of discrimination? As you can see, these questions are not sexy at all, but it is also going to make you see yourself from a different standpoint, which is more politic. And we normally don't like to see this reality in our daily life. This is also part of our identity. So now we have the North, and this is going to be the dimension of our passions, creativity, self-expression, and everything that creates our most authentic self in essence. It might be a little difficult because after doing all the work that we have been doing in the previous 2 dimensions, this one is going to request you to forget for a moment everything that we have been talking about, like our culture, family history, religion, etc., and go into your deepest authentic self. Many of us have learned to give ourselves value and recognition through the titles and the labels that society and our professions give us. But this is going to require you to go in a more radical and fundamental self-discovery. And so in order for us to discover this essence of ourselves, we need to ask ourselves from a different standpoint. So here, don't be afraid to show your mannerisms, your idiosyncrasies, and little tiny behaviors that make you being you. Psychologist and Holocaust survivor Dr. Edith Eger calls this type of moments Edithisms, like I have Amorisms, and these are the quotes, the goofy moments, and all those jokes that make you unique. I like to call this self-knowledge perspective the Little Prince perspective, and this is my favorite book. If you don't know what is this book about, I highly recommend you to go and check it because it's one of the most sold books of all times since its publication in 1943. It's translated into over 600 different languages and even dialects. Just to give you a little bit of background about this book, The Little Prince is a story about how at some point along the way, we adults forgot what is truly essential and also that childlike perspective of the world. In chapter 4, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry teaches us and reminds us that whereas adults, we need labels and professions and material things like titles, numbers, children really understand truth through meaning, imagination, and essence. Our essence is really found in our characteristic traits, together with our self-expression, passions, vocations, and ways of exploring and relating to others, but also to ourselves. Those are the characteristics that humans have most challenges in order to label and to know one another. This is not bad in itself, but I sadly agree with Radha Agrawal that most of the times we create labels not to relate to one another, but to separate from one another. So I'm going to suggest you my journaling prompt that I call the Little Prince Perspective Exercise. And it goes like this. Imagine a world in which a kid from another planet visits you and asks you who you are. The only problem, though, is that this kid has no idea what religion, culture, work, status, politics, medical diagnosis, or even beauty standards are. So now the question is, how would you describe yourself and what story would you tell? This framework forces you to see beyond what you have come to understand as your value, which is probably attached to the context in which you live. It forces you to see your spirit, the essence of who you are, in a more universal way. Coralia Glavas has also a very similar journaling prompt that goes more or less in the same way, and she has it inside her book, Daily Deep Journal, which is another must read if you love self-knowledge. I'm gonna give it to you just in case that you want to choose this one. She says, how would you introduce yourself without mentioning your occupation, ethnicity, nationality, hobbies, residence, or social cycle? Our enemies is the portal to our biggest fears and shadows. This is the part that we must avoid, and is precisely the one that we need to explore the most if we want to know ourselves, especially if we are going through a major transition in life. Exploring them will break us free, turning our weaknesses into superpowers. And the more we show those vulnerabilities in our daily lives, the more we are going to live a more authentic and cohesive life. And we are going to do that by learning how to live precisely with the parts of us that we like the least. So here I invite you to answer this question, and you're going to tap right into your biggest fears. If you had no fear of the consequences, what story about yourself would you tell? This is a question inspired by branding philosopher Chris Doe. According to him, personal brand is a process of self-discovery, and I couldn't agree more. He has created this amazing community of creatives that already has like millions of multi-hyphen people. For me, has been a major influence, like a mentor in the last 3 years since I discovered him in 2023 in the Adobe Max, as I told you before. And he has an incredible talent to make creatives connect with their identity through storytelling, comics, books, literary archetypes. You have to watch and check some of his work, which I highly recommend you to do, not only if you're interested in marketing, sales, branding, or art, but also if you're going through a discovery journey. He's more like a branding philosopher, and he encourages creatives to show more of the ugly origin story. This is what this last point is all about. He takes inspiration from Carl Jung's perspective of identity and the concept of the shadow work. And from here, he provides some exercises and some journaling prompts so we can go in depth into those fears. Now, a caveat here, this might be very challenging for you depending on your mental conditions. So if you think that this might open cans that you don't know how to handle, you probably want to know this and want to practice this with a person who can help you, because this is where our deepest wounds and struggles reside, and where we are going to find heavy enemies. Carl Jung had this very peculiar and original way to portray our identity, and he could divide our personality or our identity into two different parts. The persona, the public self, the one that we show to the world, and also the way in which we want the world to perceive us. And then there was the shadow, a more real self, but also the part of us that we don't want anyone to see because we don't like. And normally we only show these parts, more vulnerable parts, to the closest one, maybe to some relatives or our partner or some very good friends. And the introduction he did, what we remember Carl Jung for the most, is the ego. And the ego is precisely that part of our identity that regulates these two sides, the persona and the shadow. And whenever there is a huge gap between these two identities, we can almost 100% guarantee that at any given moment there will be a collapse. This is what we see in the comic world of the Incredible Hulk. Hulk represents the split personality disorder in the comic world. And that is what we can see sometimes when there is a huge gap, two extremes of our two identities. Shadow work is essential for anyone seeking self-knowledge, but also live more in alignment with who they truly are. It refers to the process of exploring the hidden and darker parts of our psyche. And this is not out of pure sadism. It's an exercise to invite our least sexy parts to show up and reveal themselves, to find a way to make peace with them and live a more cohesive, more authentic life. And according to Chris Doe, this is exactly where we need to tap into in order to find our superpowers counterintuitively. So for this, we only need to tap into our negative self-talk or our self-sabotage. And the way he does this is really brilliant. So he's going to guide us through an exercise divided into 3 journaling prompts where you are going to navigate the self-talk, the self-sabotage. The first exercise, you need to write down how would most people define you, like the traits that they see, those characteristic traits that you show the most, and probably you are validated by them. So for example, you can say caring or kind or empathetic, or people call me the mom of the group, the mentor of the team, or something like that. Those are things that people see in you when you work with them, or maybe in your family, or maybe in your group of friends. This is the simple part. And now what he provides is a second journaling prompt where you have to go a little bit more in depth and you have to continue this sentence. But what they don't know is that I struggle with, and then you have to insert here your shadow word, your trigger, or your strong reaction. So for example, you can say that people see me as a very caring, very accessible person. I'm always there to help others. But what they don't know is that I struggle with people pleasing, or that I struggle with setting some boundaries, or even accommodating everyone's needs. So now for the third and last journaling prompt, he asks you, what lesson or lessons can you get out of this shadow? What do you need to learn from this? And what he wants you to do is to try to find some labels or uncomfortable, ambivalent words that gives you the sense that you improve in whatever shadow work you have to do. So for example, if I am going through addiction, which by the way is an example that he goes into in his talk in the Adobe Max 2023, what lessons are you learning through your recovery process? And I think that is exactly the healing part of this narrative exercise. It goes from pain to where you need to go in order to get at the other side of your shadow work. And for that, what we are going to do is to find a transformer word, which is going to also give you this idea of ambivalence. That is also going to bring some empowerment into the process that you are going through right now. So what this is going to do, you are going to flip the shadow into a lesson to reclaim your story. What I saw when doing this exercise for myself is that labels can give us a lot of freedom. When they are used consciously, they can not only relieve pain, but also put words to very difficult unconscious experiences and bring them up to the surface. Also, they can help us start new chapters in our lives. I used to be a hater for labels, but the more I work with them, the more I realize that the problem was never the label, but how we use them. From my perspective, in the same way, words give shape to things that would otherwise remain unconscious and not seen. And I think that is also very important for people sometimes to have a word that we can use to precisely describe what we are going through is very important. We are creatures of narrative. Like, we need words. It's the only way in which we can translate what we are going through, the turmoil, the internal conundrums, and the difficult situations. We need to find some words for that experience. So, for example, one of the labels I have created for myself is local outsider. And that is huge. Like, you cannot imagine how much I describe myself as a local outsider. And this is also one aspect of my identity. I come from a multicultural, cross-cultural family where we have at least 4 or 5 cultures together. And because of that, I struggled a lot when I was a little kid to know who am I and what makes me me. Being able to find a label that works for me, where I don't have to choose my culture, it's so liberating. That has allowed me to go into different countries and try to find myself, not only in those cultures, but also in the vocabulary of those cultures. That brings me the notion and the acknowledgement that I've been living in different countries and different cities, but also that I have loved different people in different cultures. And that is what makes me a local outsider. Everywhere I go, I find myself at home, but at the same time, sometimes I'm here in Malaga and I feel like an outsider. So for me, it's a word, it's a label that gives me so much nuances into my own understanding of the human experience. The most important aspect of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is not to come to a conclusion of who we are, but rather to try to explore ourselves and to come up with different nuances. I mean, how boring would be the human experience if we could say that we have figured out everything about ourselves. And probably the biggest or most important aspect of self-knowledge is to choose consciously the stories that define us, because I truly believe that we are only as powerful as our acknowledgement to choose the stories that define us. And also, as Alain de Botton philosopher says, we will live this life probably just scratching the surface of who we really are. And this is a journey I am highly motivated to embark in. And I hope that everyone who wants to join to this community is also in that journey. And I want to know all of you in this very moment with your ugly story and with your more precious labels. If you enjoyed this episode, you are also going to love the next one, because we are going to continue exploring ourselves, but this time is going to be about relationship dynamics and communication dynamics. Thank you very much and see you in the next episode.